much. Thank you for your kind response. The website is kucinich.us. I'm open for questions about anything you're interested in. And I'll just start right now. Yes, sir.
Peter Hansen, and I'm the director of the Hancock Shaker Village here. I want to welcome you, first of all. I also want to say that I'm the interim director, so that job you're looking for is actually open.
I understand that you're well qualified.
I wanted to also just make an observation about you felt the energy of the Shakers when you came onto the site here. It's little known that the Shakers during the Civil War petitioned Abraham Lincoln heavily about the draft and about purchasing a person to go into the Army for you. And actually, they were primarily responsible for the rules and regulations around conscientious objection that came into play, and I think all of us actually had intimate involvement with at some point in our lives. So I think you did feel the right energy when you came, and I want to thank you very much for your staff and Hancock Shaker for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. How does foreign aid, I can speak loud. How does foreign aid fit into all of this? Do you know how much foreign aid is given for nice causes, good causes, helping people with education, helping people with food, and how much is given to develop armies?
The first problem that I have is that it's called foreign. Because, you know, it is called foreign, so you're right about that. But when we talk about something being foreign, it means it's other than us. It belies the fact that we're all connected, which is why I'm opposed to war, because we're all connected. The aid that we give to other countries, the greatest aid is, of course, military aid. We're the largest arms producer and arms proliferator in the world. And, you know, we are responsible for arming places all over the world. The America that I envision closes the bases around the world, brings the troops home from around the world, ends the wars, stops proliferating arms, and enables people to develop the technologies, and not just the technologies, but to develop the processes by which they can have access to water, to food, and to be able to live their lives out without without a certain kind of ideology being imposed on them. We cannot discuss war without talking about our economy, because, you know, we live in an integrated world economy, but unfortunately, the wealth is concentrating in fewer and fewer hands, and war is often used as a means to be able to protect economic interests. I mean, our war against Iraq, against Afghanistan, against Libya, all about oil, there's no question about it, and about other minerals. We have to be aware that our international relations are colored by corporate interests who will essentially use American military assets to try to advance their own profit. Next question. Gentlemen.
You mentioned the Department of Peace. There is actually, as you know, a taxpayer-funded a taxpayer-funded U.S. Institute of Peace, which I think of as actually a rather conservative think tank in its approach to war and peace. Nevertheless, it is looking for ways to advance peace and prevent conflict. But yet there seems to be a tremendous amount of animosity towards even that institution. How do you explain that animosity among your colleagues in Congress?
Well, you're right about the animosity. As a matter of fact, in the House of Representatives, an amendment to strike funding for the Institute of Peace passed about the same time as we were giving more funding for the war in Afghanistan. Kind of shows you at least we're consistent. How do you explain that? Because peace isn't real to people. We have so accepted the idea of war as an everyday part of life. And you know, the Institute of Peace, you're right, it is a think tank. And, you know, it would be incorporated into a larger Department of Peace. But we're talking about cultural questions here, really. This is a cultural issue. What's happening to our culture that we are so immersed in war? And it's not just about the government. You know, when I'm back in Cleveland, particularly when my wife, who is the Government Affairs Director for the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, they promote proper diet and nutrition. When Elizabeth and I are both in town, I'll go to a local video store, a neighborhood video store, independently owned, and just get some titles and see what the latest videos are out, and we'll watch a movie at home. And walk through a video store and look at the titles. You want to know about our culture. We're immersed in violence and horror. How does that imprint on our consciousness? You know, the world is not coming in here into the Shaker Center. I'm struck by the pastoral beauty. You come into it, it's like, wow. To me, understanding that life exists in many manifestations, but that part that I gravitate to, that's it. I can feel that. I want to be a part of that immediately. And I think there is that hunger for connection with nature that all of us have as part of our nature. But there's been a perversion of human nature that's existed through promoting violence as a commercial item. And now we're saturated with it. Television, years ago, there was a woman by the name of Peggy Charon who formed Action for Children's Television, and she was concerned about all the shootings that were going on TV on these various shows. You turn a dial, you go from channel change, you just flip from one to another, you see somebody get shot. Well, how is it that life's so cheap that shootings, particularly in inner city, can be so commonplace? Where does that come from in our consciousness? Well, we see it. There's a reference point. And the reference point that our mass media produces is pretty powerful and pretty negative. That's why there needs to be some balance in life. People need to be exposed to different possibilities of what a culture is about. And you know, a center for peace and culture, or through culture, presents the, you know, these are centers that need to be duplicated all over the country so people can start to understand that we don't need to live life swimming in a sea of violence. That doesn't really represent what life is. It's an exaggeration and often an aberration. But we buy into the fact, well, it seems to be everywhere because our culture is so saturated with it. Next question. Yes. And then the lady with it.
Following up on what you were just speaking about, how do you envision involving youngsters and 20-somethings, for which I have great hope because they're colorblind and various other understandings of life in a different perspective. How do you envision using that energy?
Well, children are marvelous. You know, in my office in Washington, I have a peace quilt that was made by the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders of Olmsted Falls Elementary School. It was given to me just a month after 9/11. And it was interesting to see, even then, just from children, how from the horror that we experienced in seeing that, children still gravitate towards reference points of love and family. And I think children are still in touch with the magic that's out there in the world. You know, that song about Toyland from Another Generation. It uses the words, once you pass that border, you can never return again. Well, that we would all be blessed in being able to have some kind of a childlike outlook on the world. And we need to nurture in our children, we need to raise our children in a way that they get a chance to understand the magic that is in life. And so in schools, we can develop that capacity by not having our children just worry about whether they're going to have a meal, whether they're going to be safe. We have to protect the children in our society, and we have to show them, as I'm talking, I'm just getting these thoughts in a running. There's a song by Dionne Warwick many years ago about, she's saying, I believe that children are our future, teach them well and let them lead the way. We have to teach them well. We have to teach them reciprocal behavior. What happens when you hit another person? How does that person feel? How do you feel? I mean, get some conscious reflection. Children are sponges in terms of their awareness to learn, not just knowledge from books, but social interaction, how we all learn. So that's the idea of the Department of Peace centers very directly on children, giving them a chance to have an experience to make them more authentic expressions of a life that is not crippled by violence, showing them how they can have a sense of agency in their relationships with others. Some schools already have this. They have various peer mediation programs, and when there's a problem, they help children figure out how to their differences and develop that capacity, because it's a social capacity. So I think, and then when we're talking about that's children at an elementary level, where you can teach peace sharing. You can teach peace. We teach war, we can teach peace. For the younger adults, we have a responsibility to let our younger adults know that the role for them in the world has to go beyond that of being warriors. Look at today, the only jobs that many young people can get are in the service. And while serving our nation is an honorable thing to do, what kind of a society are we that we've so limited opportunities for young people, encouraging them to get a college education, telling them, you get that education, you get ahead, you go out and get a job, and then they do it, they're there with that sheepskin, and then the minute they start knocking on doors, the doors aren't open to them. What have we done? And yet they can be all they can be as long as they join the right organization, right? No, that's not right. So we have an obligation to make our economy more open so that young people have a chance to enter into it. The other side of that, I believe, and this is heresy in an era where people are talking about either eliminating retirement benefits or pushing retirement back to 67, I think we ought to give people the option, if they so desire, to retire at 62 and create more openings in the workplace so young people would have a chance to get in. We are selling our young people short. And by the time they're in college, they understand instinctively that these wars are crazy. They don't want to get pulled into them. But we have an obligation to not just end the wars, but to create the conditions where people can participate, young people can participate in the economy in a meaningful way. And where they're not going to be strapped with all these loans, which create extraordinary stress. For the next 10 years of somebody's life after graduation, they're saddled with loans. Why don't we have free college? I mean, this is like some radical idea, but let me tell you something. I just want to take this as a moment to depart from this discussion and tell you why, America's just been ransomed for war and poverty. And let me tell you, with 50 million people living in poverty according to the latest census statistics, 50 million people, 1 out of every 6 persons in America living in poverty. How did this happen? When I met Elizabeth, she introduced me to this concept of monetary reform. And as a result of she and I, in a many years conversation, I came to an understanding of how money is created. And the fact that you have banks who will take your loan and create money out of nothing. It's called fractional reserve. They just pyramid the money that people give them. They create the money out of nothing, use it as an accounting entry, loan that money, but they also may invest it once the barriers were taken down between commercial and investment banking. Banks pyramided their assets on paper. When the assets collapsed, we bailed out the banks. But then you also have the Federal Reserve, which creates money out of nothing. Now, the ability to create money is in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8. Government has the ability to coin money, create money. We gave that up in the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, giving to the Fed the ability to privatize the money. So now we're told we can't have jobs. We can't have health care. We can't have education. We can't have retirement security. But banks can get trillions of dollars through the Federal Reserve, which creates the money out of nothing using the sovereign position of the people of the United States, creates an entry, and if the money doesn't come back, that's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. And so now, banks get $700 billion in bailouts, $1.2 trillion in secret loans, which then banks use for mergers and acquisitions or park their money at the Fed to gain interest. And yesterday we find that the Fed, which famously, was created supposedly to help stabilize the economy and namely to create jobs, is giving money to European banks now. What is going on here? We're told 50 million people are supposed to accept poverty as part of their everyday lives. There's a connection to war, because if people do not have the ability to be socially and economically effective, if you get kicked out of the economy, a political democracy, or rather an economic democracy, is a precondition of a political democracy. If people don't have the ability to participate as economic beings, they lose the ability to be able to affect the circumstances of their existence. And then when government wants to take the country to war, there's millions of people who are so riveted in trying to survive, they cannot get out there and stop it from happening. So we are losing, we're losing our ability to have peace, because the material world has essentially been hijacked for the ability of a few. Now, I happen to believe that we're here to bring spiritual principles into that material world and elevate the material world. I mean, it's a concept that's a very old concept. It involves the discussions of transubstantiation in the Christian Catholic religion. It involves the principles of Shakti, Yanam, Tapasya in the Hindu culture, where they talk about, we're the energy of the stars, and we become the energy of the stars. And we have all of this connection to the material world and the spiritual world. But when it comes to the material world has basically been appropriated for a few at the expense of the many. I object to that. To me, it's not about capitalism, socialism, communism. All the isms are rheumatism, as far as I'm concerned. It's about what works. How do you have a just society? And we have an unjust society that is driving people into poverty and riveting us into war. And so I actually introduced legislation that will be coming up next week called the NEED Act, the National Employment Emergency Defense Act. The idea of defending America through putting people to work. And what it does is it reverses what the 1913 Federal Reserve Act did and puts the Federal Reserve back in the Treasury, so the government has control over it. It eliminates fractional reserve banking, so it doesn't expose people through bank speculation. And third, it empowers the government to return to where we were when we started, where the government can invest money and rebuilding America and put people back to work. We could create millions of jobs. Why do we have to borrow money from banks in order to build roads? And I mean, it's an inherent power of the government. It's like all of a sudden I start looking at this and going, hey, where are we here as a country? So reality is socially constructed and culturally affirmed. We understand that. The writings of Peter Berger went very deeply into that. But think about this. If we really want to construct a new reality in this country, then we have to bring forth a new discussion about who we are. Why do we have to have work? Why do we have to have unemployment? Why do we have to have people ill-educated, ill-housed, ill-fed? Why do we accept that? Why don't we challenge that? Why aren't we in the streets? Why aren't we becoming visible? Why aren't we showing that we stand for principles, not just in the quietness of our hearts, but in the expressive power of our presence? Next question. Yeah. Yes, the lady in the back.
You have just a phenomenal voting record.
I have a what?
You have a phenomenal voting record.
What? No.
You have the most outstanding voting record. And we use you as an example with our congressperson who has suggested that we move to Ohio. But we're not. So I'd like to ask you how we as citizens can better influence the congresspeople who represent us and our needs. And
Talk to them. I mean, that's the first thing.
what if they don't? We write letters. We had to take over his office twice to get to speak with him.
Seems like a nice neighborhood here. Well,
and he doesn't answer our letters.
I think it's always good to try to communicate with government officials. And after 9/11, there was a lapse in time that occurred. Once people send letters, they go through some kind of a screening, and we get them 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later. Emails come in batches, but what happens is that because you get spammed with emails about everything under the sun, it's tough to create filters where you are able to get people from your constituency. Telephone calls to district offices, leaving your name, and demanding at least to talk to a staffer. That works, because in most offices, you communicate to a congressional staff and you say, tell the congressman this. Most of the time, you'll get the message. No, I mean, it really does happen. And also find out, if there's a community event that is non-political, which congresspersons inevitably show up at, it's a good time to just say, hey, what's going on? And there are many different ways to communicate. Yes, in the back.
I'd like to piggyback on that question. There's a big movement underway
There's something happening October 6th onward for various groups like MoveOn.org and the Pink Ladies. All these different groups and Bill Moyer's various celebrities are coming out to occupy Washington and not leave until things change.
Cool.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, is Chris Hedges, who recently gave a lecture and said, none of this good stuff is going to happen through government, that we've all really got to create our individual local environments. So he's given up on politics altogether. And I'm just wondering your opinion on, should I go to Washington October 6th, or am I totally naive and that's not going to help?
Well, actually, they're both right. Let me explain what a political answer there's. I'm not a politician for nothing, right? So here's how they're both right. What Chris Hedges is saying, and Chris is brilliant,
Yeah.
one of the best writers out there. He writes with incredible passion and great insight. We have to cultivate our own gardens. We have to do that. But the two aren't mutually exclusive. We have to do that, and we should also be physically present. I remember 2 years ago being in a meeting in then Speaker Pelosi's office and seeing 10,000 members of the growing Tea Party movement on the back lawn of the Capitol. And there were people, members of Congress walking in, and I'm looking at them going, holy smokes, that's a lot of people. And there's some members coming in, and they're looking for a second and go, oh, whatever. I'm saying, hey, wait a minute, there's something going on here. You better pay attention to it. We need to, the most important thing is to be visible. We know the civil rights movement didn't pass until there were millions of people who made it happen. You know, whatever movement you see in American history that has been capped by some legislative action that institutionalized a new type of America, that happened after years of struggle. And so we should not be absent from that struggle. We have to be present. We have to be visible. I think the most important thing, I think, is visibility. It was so extraordinary, though, to witness in January and February of 2003, millions of people going to the streets all over the world protesting the impending war against Iraq. Unfortunately, once the war started, people just said, well, it doesn't make any difference, forget it. And then the peace movement, as evidenced by people being out there on the streets, seemed to dissipate rather quickly. This is the perfect time for it to come back. And it's not just about peace, it's about economic justice. The two are hand in hand. You can't keep spending money on war and watch a society rot from within. That's exactly what we're doing. We're spending money on war, the Congress keeps appropriating money for war, and it's often done by people who proclaim they're for peace. You know, which, I mean, George Orwell would have loved serving in the United States Congress. Next question. I think I have time for just a couple more. Who's had their hand up for the whole time and I haven't called on them? Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you've said, and I'm proud that you're from my hometown of Cleveland.
Hey.
But I've got to express one disappointment. You were a champion of single-payer health care, and then suddenly you changed your position in favor of compulsory for-profit insurance after President Obama gave you a plane ride back to Cleveland.
That was a great plane.
Yeah, it must have been, and I'm wondering what you got to change your vote.
Well, the idea that a ride on an airplane with the president, who I have a chance to see anytime I want to, would change my mind is an interesting idea. But let me tell you what happened with that health care vote. I have been leading the way in the United States Congress, and still do, for a universal, single-payer, not-for-profit health care system. I participated in those. I participated in 5 meetings with President Obama on health care, and each one I pushed for single-payer, and we're not going to do that. So each time. In some of the meetings, there were 80 people, 100 people. Some of the meetings there were 20, and some where there were just a few. 5, 6 in a room. Not going to do that. Indeed, I was the last person. 75 Democrats signed a letter saying they're not going to vote for anything unless it has a public option. It at least created the potential for some competition with these private insurance companies. You're looking at the last man standing on that. I said, you know, everyone else had basically caved. And the vote was drawing near. It was going to be a very close vote. So the president was flying to Cleveland. He asked me to join him. And you know, what happened on the airplane was we had a discussion. We basically went over where we'd been before. And I saw something. I saw that he wasn't going to change his mind. And I also saw that the few benefits that were in there, which included people being able to get coverage for pre-existing conditions, which was particularly important for children, that was one of those benefits that could be tangible that I had to think about. And in the end, the reason why I voted for it wasn't because the president told me anything. If I had to rely on what he told me, I'd have voted against it. What happened is that I thought about it, went into the rotunda, the day after I had a conversation with him at 7 o'clock in the morning, sat next to the statue of Abraham Lincoln, where I sit on occasion in the solitude of the Capitol at that time of day, and try to come up with a decision. And when I decided that I would vote for it, because if that had been defeated, those who don't want to see any kind of structural change in healthcare at all would very easily dismiss the idea of change within the context of a change to a not-for-profit system, if you can't even make any kind of changes within the context of a for-profit system. I mean, that's how I came to that decision. Now, President Obama called me the night before I made the decision. I didn't return the call, because I just felt that I'm going to make this decision on my own. The White House was watching when I had the press conference, because they didn't know. The President had no guarantees from me. And the reason why I voted that way is in the hopes, not because I was in love with that plan at all, and the objection that you voiced, I had the same objection, but because the structural change that I see politically is to show that it's possible to that you can make some movement, because the insurance companies were screaming about any kind of change at all. So we created some movement, some opening. Having said that, there's still 50 million people who don't have health care. The for-profit health care is an anachronism. It cannot work. It inevitably deprives people of access. And we need, and I'm about to reintroduce a new health care bill that will not only be single payer, but for the first time it will open up to empowering people to pursue alternative means of achieving their own health through a whole range of alternative health care strategies that deal with diet, nutrition, that deal with dozens of different ways that people can empower themselves to have a path towards achieving their own health. So, you know, that was not an easy decision for me. On one hand, I thought, well, if I could be this. It was coming down to just a couple of votes, and that I could have been the person that stopped it. Now, if we stopped it, we'd still have 50 million people without any health care. It's kind of where we are today. However, we now have learned that it is possible to have a structural change within the context of a for-profit system, which I believe sets the stage at some point, showing people we can take the next step, which is a bigger step, to have changed from a for-profit to a not-for-profit. Now, I can't tell you that this was a decision I relished. But I didn't make the decision to help the president. I did it because I thought it was in the long-term best interest of the country. In the back. And I'm going to do one, the gentlelady there, and I'll do one more question. I'll do two in the back, one there, and then I'm going to have to go. Yes. And thank you for your thoughtful questions.
Thank you very much. I love and we love that you speak to and about spiritual principles. And with the Native American drum, I hear a little bit in the background. I wonder how we can heal the spirit of America and American people if the United States government has not yet, that I know of, utterly and completely apologized to the Native American population. I mean, as far as I see it, we haven't owned our collective shadow to take full responsibility for what we did here on our own land. So like you say, we keep going around the world creating the same atrocities. We just sat with an Osage elder, Richard Castle, and it was a great honor to be with him as it is with you. I'd love to have the two of you together, and he spoke of simplicity and gardening and the importance of seeds. What do you say to this, and what do you recommend I or we do to get the government's attention to take full responsibility to the First Nations people? We have medicine people who live on reservations without water, without food. Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank you for that question, and I also am grateful for the brilliant way in which you expressed it, because I wrote an essay that was included in a collection of essays in a book by Marianne Williamson, where I talked exactly about this, about how we need to apologize to our Native brothers and sisters and to come to a moment of actually admitting what happened. I think about this a lot. When I ran for president in 2004, I made it a point to go to a number of reservations, particularly in the West. And the conditions at many of those reservations are appalling. Drug addiction, alcoholism, people not having adequate access to water, mining taking place on Indian land that has resulted in the poisoning of the land and the water. My work in challenging the drilling in the Alaska Wildlife Preserve was also to protect Native peoples there. And when my wife and I were married, we were married in a Native ceremony. And actually, the invitations had an Indian couple on there. And because we are truly committed to this elevation of the status of Native peoples and the recognition of their Trail of Tears. I appreciate that you mentioned that, because it reminds me that we have work to do in that regard. And what I will do, because you've mentioned it, is to see what kind of proposals are out there for that kind of recognition. And I'd like to talk to you afterwards briefly, and we could talk about how we can advance it, because it is something that has to be done. We do follow our shadow. It's a shadow we still follow, by the way, on slavery as well. The fact that in 1968, the report on national civil disturbances, otherwise known as the Kerner Report, outlined some of the social and economic ills in this country that led to riots in American cities. Massive unemployment, disconnection from housing, people not having an access to education. Some of these things are still going on right now. The census figures that just came out said that, I may be interpreting this loosely, but you get the idea that whites in America have 20 times the wealth as blacks, and as a category of people. And think about that. You know, when jobs are lost, people have been the last in or the first out. So this is, our society has a lot of healing to do. And in a way, that's, by escaping that, we don't have, and going off into more and more wars, we keep creating more and more problems. How are we going to reconcile with the people of Iraq? Because as a result of the war, 1 million innocent people died. What's that about? I mean, how could we let that happen? See, this is why, this talk about the culture that we live in and the awareness of it, and our consciousness that we have the ability to bring about a transformation is so important. Before I answer the last question back there, I remember a discussion that I had with Barbara Marx Hubbard, who's just a lovely human being. Barbara and I talked a few years ago and about this, about looking at about human potential and understanding from studies of biological evolution that an evolutionary track can go at a certain point, and the growth of a species will come over many, many years, but then there's a point where there is a break called punctuated equilibrium, and then suddenly there's a rapid development of a species. And I think that this concept of biological evolution, which is people are well aware of, except for a few presidential candidates, that there's also a potential for social evolution, that we grow socially as a people, but then there's a point where there's a break that occurs. Now, how does that break happen? It happens when we self-consciously become co-creators of our own existence. This is the power that we have. and become more than we are, better than we are. That we really have the ability to just change it all. But when we're mired in war and poverty, it can be daunting to try to do. But this experience that you have here at the Shaker Center, and the Center for Peace and Culture, gives you always the opportunity to be able to challenge the status quo, and again in the words of Shelley, to defy powers which seem omnipotent. Yes. Last question, please. There it comes that mic. It's like the Phil Donahue show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. What I wanted to bring up is so many of us had so much hope when President Obama was first elected into office. And I know that for me, part of that hope was the sense of transpartisanship. I feel so strongly that the oldest political rule is divide and conquer. And when you mentioned that in your bill for the full employment defense, that part of it was the economic thing of bringing in the Federal Reserve back into the Treasury, it was so exciting to me. And I know that I've heard people on right-wing ends also do a lot of critique of the Federal Reserve and things like that. And so I'm wondering how much cross-partisanship support there might be for something like that. But also, on a larger sense, my concern is that I feel that the very idea of transpartisanship has been, I don't want to say ruined, but I just feel like there's been such a disappointment in that instead of a real dialogue, there's been almost like a hijacking, because I feel that there haven't been enough voices at the table. It's like the Tea Partiers have been at the table because of their pressure and visibility and whatever, but I don't feel like the progressives have been at the table because, and it comes back to us, because as you were saying, we haven't been visible enough, and so the whole balance has way skewed. And so I just would love to hear from you about that, because this is my deepest passion, is that if we can really get all of the perspectives there, we can find a way to peaceably come up with something better for all.
The first thing that I thank you for your question. The first thing that I would advise is forget about labels. Labels really don't describe who we are, and they don't describe who other people are. Labels are a clipped and analytical way of being able to dispense with a situation that often is too complex to try to contemplate. We don't have to, so let's get beyond the labels. I work with people in Congress, whatever party they happen to be, whatever political persuasion, it's about pursuing what Franklin Roosevelt called the science of human relations. And being able to get to know the people. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but to understand why they look at the world the way they do. What I found, curiously enough, the people who are most ready for the kind of changes that I talked about in terms of this NEED Act, to change the role of the Fed and try to get some power back for people, Tea Party. Really interesting. I mean, they're less tied to the political establishment. They really did come in to shake things up. So I've always been careful about being critical, criticizing people with a broad brush based on how they describe themselves. I want to find out who they are as individuals. There are people who call themselves progressives, but their voting records may show that they're doing something else if you use labels. So we have to deal with people as to who they are and to what they think. And the gift that I have, being in the United States Congress, is I have an opportunity to talk to people and on both sides of the aisle and try to move them in a direction of thinking about a different way. When I challenged the war in Libya, which if there ever was a phony war that this country cooked up, let me tell you, that's one of them. When I challenged the war in Libya, Republicans were ready to listen. Tea Party types were ready to listen. And they joined our effort, not because they were interested in challenging the Obama administration, but because they said, why are we continuing to go into these wars? They aren't making any sense. Now, because our world relies on dichotomies, us versus them, that's the base of war, right? Us versus them, rich versus poor, black versus white, young versus old, men versus women. I mean, it's all a heavily dichotomized world. Because we rely on dichotomies, we slip so easily into criticizing Republicans if we're Democrats, or Democrats if we're Republicans. Instead of who are the people? What do they think? Can we influence them? It is a mistake not to try to influence people just because they're in another party. And I know this because these are people I work with every day. Does it mean in the end that we're going to vote alike? Probably not. But there are moments for tremendous change and transition that are possible if we just don't carry this burden of labeling, which is, I find, the longer I'm in Washington, the less labels mean. I can't really see often a difference between the Obama administration and the Bush administration. Now, I say that not to criticize either of them, but to say I don't really, one's Democrat, the other one's Republican. We're both still in war, there's still employment, there's still Wall Street ruling, so I don't know. Democrat, Republican, what does that all mean?
Join the Green Party.
Well, I like the color green. But let me just conclude by saying, oh, you must be a green agent. Okay. As I'm standing here just listening to you, and also listening to many different strains of thought that come in when I do these things. I keep hearing this song by Katy Perry. Sorry. How many of you know who Katy Perry is? All right, okay. You know the song Firework? It really is about, I see the heart as being very fiery. Helena Roark writes about that. And it's interesting, if you look at some of the representations of Christ, the Sacred Heart, you see the fire in the heart. But going from Jesus to Katy Perry, quite a switch. But she has this song called Firework, which really talks about the power of the heart and how we can just fill that in, put that into our lives, pour it into our lives. So that's what I encourage you to do. Thank you very much.